Well, it has been a very interesting day for us, listening to the various speakers. I think there was a stimulating discussion. It was very useful for us, the Commission, to listen from our American, Japanese, and Chinese friends where they stand and what they have done. As was mentioned by a number of speakers, this is a stimulus for us to take it as, of course, as background to what has been achieved so far, but also to act. I also note that it was quite interesting to see that the perspective may have been quite different in some of the countries mentioned today, Japan and China. The main purpose was not reducing CO2 emissions, which is a byproduct. It was reducing fuel efficiency, improving fuel efficiency. And we should keep this in mind also when we communicate with the public, because sometimes the objective to reduce CO2 emissions may seem a bit abstract to a number of people, but for truck drivers, I think that improving fuel efficiency is certainly something very concrete. So surprisingly, many of you are still there, so maybe I should take it as a sign of interest for what the Commission may tell you on the strategy we have in mind. Might disappoint some of you because I will not disclose today our strategy. We're not yet there. I will try to walk you through the process and give you some ideas on the agenda that we have in mind. As you know, we have adopted this year roadmap for low carbon economy in 2050 with the very ambitious objective for the EU to reduce by 80 to 95% CO2 emissions, well, greenhouse gas emissions, but I will simplify it today and limit the discussion to CO2 emissions by 2050. In the recently published transport roadmap, which was published in March this year, we gave an indication of the goal for the transport sector, which would be to reduce by around 60% GHG emissions in 2050. This is also against 1990 levels. And the more, I shouldn't say short-term, but medium-term objective is to reduce the emissions of the transport sector by 20% against 2008 in 2030. So this is the overall framework of our policies. I think it's important mentioning that we have objectives for the transport sector. There were hints in the discussion today of the need for efficiency in having savings where they are most efficient. Yes, but at the same time, the Commission has specific objectives for the transport sector. So that will not be traded with other sectors of the economy. This is an objective per se. That has been the most popular slide today, I believe. That has been already mentioned by two previous speakers. I also borrowed that to Industry to Daimler. But this is an interesting figure. Coming to HDV, HDVs and HDV emissions. As you know, we have a challenge there because not only we have difficulties in assessing emissions at this stage, but the hints, the elements we have to assess the performance of the HDVs, the trucks, suggest that performance is not improving so much in recent years. I mean, there was a stage where it was improving quickly, but then with the introduction of several Euro 4, 5, 6 regulations, a lot of these improvements were also eaten by the need to comply with Euro regulations, which we recognize. Obviously, there is that has put a brake on competitiveness improvements in terms of fuel efficiency. So the background situation is not such an easy one. So how can we significantly reduce emissions of HDVs? Next slide, please. We used a lot some of the data produced by AEA and Ricardo consultants in the so-called Lot 1 study that was published on our website. The link to our website is down on this slide, and it will be available for you afterwards. That was published earlier this year. It was finalized, I think, in February. AEA did a number of scenarios, a baseline scenario based on existing trends, business as usual, with increased transport activity, and two different scenarios as well. One based on the technology uptakes that would significantly improve the current trends, and an even more ambitious scenario. Now, this is the business as usual one, and as you see, in spite of assumptions on continuous slow improvements in HDV performance, which should not be taken for granted on the basis of the previous figure, we have continuous increases in HDV emissions over the next 20 years. So that is a quite challenging situation, and the one we have to deal with. Next slide, please. And these are the two alternative scenarios in green and dark green, showing that at best by 2030 we could in the challenging scenario reach emissions below 2010 figures, but this is the most ambitious scenario, and it's not even taken for granted. So another challenging element, and calling for a clear policy to deal with this. For the time being, we don't have any instrument as regards HDVs. We have not included HDVs in the ETS. I can come back to this if there are questions, but there are a number of reasons for this. As you know, we have regulated cars and vans emissions, and this is starting to produce quite significant results. But this is also very recent, so we don't have a long-term perspective, background perspective on this. And as was mentioned today, we now are faced with a situation where we need to deal with the HDVs. Next slide. Now, the Commission is not starting from a completely empty toolbox, and we have a number of legislation and actions that in many ways contribute reducing HDV emissions. We have the Clean Vehicles Directive of 2009. It's still very recent on procurement of public authorities' vehicles. We have an important R&D program under the so-called Green Car Initiative. A large part of the funding is going to the HDV sector, and that contributes to improve improve innovation in the industry and the uptake of innovation. We have fuel standards, directives regulating fuel standards with low carbon. We have a very recent directive as well on ITS. It's not yet producing any immediate results because there is a prioritization of actions in this directive which imply that HDVs will benefit and fleet operations will benefit only at some stage later of the framework that has been put in place by this directive, but it is also worth mentioning. We recently proposed a revised energy taxation directive where we would put a price on carbon. So that is a directive which is before Council and Parliament. It's not yet adopted. It may be difficult to adopt it as such, as everyone knows, because we need unanimity on tax issues. So that's pretty challenging, but this is part of the current Commission policies. We have a Eurovignette directive on road user charging, on truck users charging, which increasingly establishes the principle of mileage user charging. We have tar labeling and rolling resistance legislation. So all this is already a useful toolkit, but it is certainly not enough in view of the challenge that I have mentioned and the trends which are quite challenging for us, and we need to consider further actions. So the first priority for us, and that is, I think, in line with what industry has told us today, is the measurement. Why? Well, we need to establish a baseline. We don't have comparability between the various truck manufacturers across countries, etc. So before considering any other steps, we need to have a clear idea of HDV emissions. And that's what we are working on right now. We have an important contract with University Graz, Professor Hausberger, who is in this room, and we are hoping to have the results of the pilot phase of this measurement tool, at least for some classes of vehicles, by the end of next year. So this would be a simulation-based methodology, and that this methodology would measure full vehicle emissions and not only tractors or motors. Motors emissions, by the way, will already now be measured as regulated by the Euro 6 directive. So this is the first priority, and we have put a lot of efforts on this, and we will of course continue to work on this over the next over the short term. Hope to be able to have this methodology implemented in a not too distant future. Now, when will that be exactly? That would be maybe too early for me to say today, but if I mention 2013, 2014, that is the indicative range. And then we are considering another set of policy actions that would follow or accompany the introduction of methodology. The methodology would be used as a measurement and reporting tool that would establish the databases, baseline, which we need as soon as possible. That would enable us to go for labeling as well. We had an interesting discussion yesterday with our American friends who abandoned the idea of labeling for HDVs precisely because of the lack of accurate data. So if we have an accurate account of full vehicles emissions, that would be, of course, the way to go forward with labeling. We could go a step beyond and establish emission reduction objectives, and that would be a succeeding step, but of course, before to go ahead with any action of this type, we need a good track record. In parallel, we are also examining a number of instruments. We could have economic instruments, tax instruments, ETS, revisit road user charging, etc. That is one way to look at it. We can also look at some of the performance criteria for components. We already have regulation on tires, but we could also regulate other components. By the way, we are also in parallel, this is not the responsibility of our service, DG Climate, but this is being done in parallel by other DGs, DG Enterprise and DG Transport. We are revisiting our weights and dimensions legislation. So that is a parallel process already taking place. And we could have measures targeted at HDV purchase and use. So we are considering a full set of possible measures. Where do we stand today? Well, we have launched an impact assessment. As you know, any new legislation in the EU now, any Commission proposal needs to be prepared by a full-fledged impact assessment, laying out the pros and cons and the economic model for the legislation, the cost-benefit analysis, etc. So that is what we are working on. We have in mind completing this impact assessment by the end of next year. Now, to do this, we have a number of steps. We have posted on the web a questionnaire already at the end of September. We have received some replies, but not replies of all the obvious stakeholders. So we very much encourage you to step in if you have not already replied and send us your comments. We will hold the stakeholders meeting in a closer format. Today is a wide international audience, but we will hold stakeholders meeting in a more European-wide audience in the first semester of next year. What we have in mind at this stage is holding the first meeting around February, March, and the second one around May, June. The first one would be an open consultation on a list of options without prejudging what the Commission would do and would propose. And the second one would be on the basis of a first draft indicative strategy. So this is where we stand, and we hope with this, having completed the impact assessment by the end of next year, to be able to propose a strategy in 2013, in the first half of 2013. So basically, this gives you an overall idea of the agenda. I think that, I hope that this is helpful for you. We will very much welcome all the inputs that you can provide in this process. Today's meeting is already very useful in this respect, but we will have a more organized consultation with the various options early next year. So thank you very much, and I'm ready to take questions.